A silver eagle vanished into the fog of ancient Britain, and an entire Roman legion disappeared with it. What happened to the legendary Ninth Legion is one of history's most enduring military mysteries. By the end of this journey, you will sift through the evidence yourself, weighing theories of catastrophic battles, secret transfers, and cover-ups that have baffled scholars for centuries. We will follow its last known steps into the Northern Highlands, examine a shocking artifact found far from Britain, and ask why this story still captivates us. Was this the Empire's greatest defeat on British soil, or a bureaucratic secret lost to time? What does it truly mean when a symbol of ultimate power simply disappears? To understand the magnitude of its disappearance, you must first know the force that vanished. This was the Legio IX Hispana, the Ninth Spanish Legion, a name forged in the fires of Rome's rise. Its history stretched back to the civil wars of Julius Caesar himself, a veteran unit that had fought across Europe. By the early 2nd century, it was a hardened, permanent fixture in the province of Britannia, a cornerstone of Roman power. A full legion was a self-contained army of around 5,000 men. It was not just soldiers, but a mobile city of engineers, craftsmen, medics, and clerks. This was Rome's cutting edge, a machine of discipline and engineering tasked with holding the line at the empire's wildest fringe. Their home was the fortress at Eboracum, modern-day York, a stone and timber bastion against the untamed north. From here, the Ninth projected power, patrolled frontiers, and confronted the fierce, unconquered tribes of the Highlands, particularly the Caledonians. Their role was constant, grinding pressure, the maintenance of an imperial peace through sheer, undeniable force. And at the heart of this force, both physically and spiritually, was its aquila, its eagle. Cast in silver or gold, perched atop a towering standard, this was no mere flag. It was the legion's sacred soul. Soldiers believed the eagle carried the favor of Jupiter, the king of the gods. To lose it in battle was not a tactical setback. It was a cosmic catastrophe. It meant the gods had turned their faces away. The eagle's loss rendered the legion's very existence null and void. The unit would be disbanded in disgrace, its name often stricken from the records, erased from memory. So when we speak of the lost eagle of the Ninth, we are not talking about a misplaced piece of military hardware. We are talking about the potential snuffing out of a legion's eternal honor. This profound weight is what makes the silence that follows so deafening. Yet for all its power and prestige, the Ninth Legion leaves behind a paper trail that ends with startling abruptness. We can track its movements for over a century, then suddenly, the documents go silent. Its final, concrete appearances in history are like footprints leading to the edge of a cliff. We see it first during one of Britain's most violent convulsions, the revolt of Queen Boudica in the year 60. The Ninth marched south to confront the rebel army, but walked into a devastating ambush. Only the cavalry escaped. It was a near-total annihilation of its infantry, a catastrophic blow that should have ended the legion right then. But Rome was relentless. The Ninth was rebuilt with fresh recruits, and it endured. Decades later, we find it hard at work in the north, constructing its great permanent fortress at Eboracum, the stone and timber headquarters that would be its home for generations. The last definitive proof we have of its existence is a small, mundane object, a tile. Found in the fortress at York, it bears a stamped inscription that reads, Legio IX Hispana, made by the Ninth Legion. It dates to around the year 108. After that, nothing. No victory monuments, no transfer orders, no payroll records, not a single grave marker of a soldier who died in its service after that date. For a military machine as meticulous as Rome, this silence is not just unusual, it is deafening. It is the administrative equivalent of a door slamming shut. One moment the Ninth is there, a living, breathing institution. The next, it has evaporated from the record, leaving behind only its empty fortress and a mystery that would echo for 2,000 years. This silence coincides with a period of escalating violence on the Empire's northernmost frontier. Beyond the Roman forts and patrols lay Caledonia, a land of mist, mountains, and fiercely independent tribes who saw the legions as an invading plague. For decades, Rome had probed this rugged territory with mixed success. winning battles but never securing true control. The land itself was a hostile force, all dense forests, treacherous bogs, and sudden, rolling fogs that could swallow an army whole. In the early years of the 2nd century, under Emperor Trajan and his governor Quintus Pompeius Falco, the pressure intensified. Roman sources speak of a great British war, of revolts that required significant military reinforcement. It is into this simmering cauldron that the 9th Legion, based at York, would logically have been drawn. Their entire purpose was to confront threats from the north. So the most enduring and dramatic theory begins with a simple, chilling order. The 9th is commanded to march beyond the last secure outpost, into the highlands, to quell a major Caledonian uprising. Picture the long column snaking into the hills, 5,000 men in gleaming armor, their eagle standard held high at the front. They follow a narrow track through ancient woods, the mist closing in around them, dampening the sound of their march. They are confident, disciplined, the very image of imperial power. But in these hills, the rules of Roman warfare do not apply. The Caledonians were masters of guerrilla tactics, of sudden, furious ambushes from the tree line before melting back into the landscape. They knew every hidden ravine, every path that could become a trap. The stage is set for a catastrophe. Could the entire 9th Legion have been lured into an impossible battle, surrounded on broken ground, and cut down to the last man? The silence that follows their last dated tile at York would then be the silence of a tomb, a legion erased in a single, terrible day. This is the story that has fueled imaginations for centuries, a heroic last stand lost to the Highland mist. But is it the only story the evidence can tell? The theory of a final, catastrophic battle is the oldest and most visceral explanation for the legion's disappearance. It suggests the 9th marched north from York to face a unified force of Caledonian tribes, a confederation united under a powerful, charismatic leader. These were not disorganized raiders, but skilled warriors who understood their terrain intimately. They could have lured the Romans deep into a narrow glen or forest, where their disciplined formations became a liability. The attack would have been sudden from all sides, with thousands of warriors descending from the high ground. In the chaos and confusion, the legion's command structure would have shattered. The standard bearers, guarding the eagle with their lives, would have been primary targets. If the eagle fell, the heart went out of the resistance. The battle would have become a massacre, a desperate, bloody struggle until the last cohort was overrun. The complete destruction of over 5,000 professional soldiers seems almost unimaginable, yet Rome had suffered such a disaster before. In the dense German forests, 3 entire legions under Publius Quinctilius Varus were annihilated in the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. That loss was so profound, it halted Roman expansion east of the Rhine forever. Emperor Augustus was said to have wandered his palace, crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." So we know it was possible. The critical difference is that Teutoburg was documented, a traumatic national memory. For the 9th in Britain, there is no such record. Could Rome have truly suffered another disaster of that scale and simply never written it down? Perhaps, if no high-ranking officer survived to report it, and if the Caledonians controlled the battlefield so completely that no Roman scout could ascertain the truth. The legion would have just vanished. The official line in Rome might have been one of unexplained loss, a mystery too embarrassing to investigate further, its details buried to avoid public panic and political shame. This silence, then, is not evidence against the battle, but perhaps its direct consequence. The memory of such a defeat might not survive in Roman histories, but could it live on in another form, in the songs and stories of the people who won? That very silence, however, presents its own profound puzzle. If a battle of such magnitude truly occurred, where is the battlefield? The grim reality of archaeology offers no clear answer. Across the Scottish Highlands, no single site has yielded the unmistakable, concentrated evidence of a legion's destruction. We have not found a field scattered with 5,000 Roman hobnails from their sandals, nor a mass grave holding the bones of men and horses intermingled with shattered armor. This absence is stark, especially when compared to places like Teutoburg Forest in Germany. There, archaeologists have uncovered a sprawling battlefield littered with weapons, coins, and even the gruesome pits where Roman soldiers were buried by their Germanic victors. The earth there tells the story. In Caledonia, the earth remains stubbornly quiet. This lack of physical proof does not necessarily disprove the battle. It complicates it. The Scottish landscape itself is a formidable adversary to discovery. The acidic soils of the highlands can dissolve bone and metal with startling speed, leaving little behind after centuries. A battlefield might be hidden beneath a modern town, a forestry plantation, or layers of peat bog that have slowly swallowed the past whole. Furthermore, if the Caledonians were victorious, they would have conducted a thorough and deliberate stripping of the site. Roman armor, weapons, and tools were priceless prizes, to be melted down, reforged, or traded. The most precious trophy of all, the silver eagle, would have been taken immediately, perhaps hidden away as a sacred object or broken apart and distributed as talismans. The victors would have left little for future archaeologists to find, effectively erasing the material memory of their triumph. The silence, then, might not be an accident of time, but a deliberate act. It forces us to consider a darker, more complete form of defeat. This wouldn't have been a battle with a messy aftermath for the Romans to later survey. It could have been a total, clean eradication, where every piece of valuable equipment was scavenged, every body left to the elements or cast into a remote lock, and every story controlled by the side that won. The Romans, with no survivors to report and no ability to reclaim the ground, might have been left with only rumors and dread. They knew the legion was gone, but the how and the where remained a terrifying blank space on their maps, a story they themselves may have chosen not to record in detail. So the archaeological void doesn't close the case, it deepens the intrigue. It suggests that if the Ninth fell in battle, it fell so completely that even the earth was persuaded to keep it secret. But a legion is more than just its men on the ground. It is a line item in a vast imperial ledger, and sometimes the most dramatic stories have the most mundane endings. This leads us to a second, less romantic but equally compelling theory. Perhaps the Ninth Legion was not annihilated in a blaze of glory, but simply reassigned. The Roman Empire was a sprawling entity constantly juggling military resources. A crisis on the Danube frontier or along the Rhine River could have prompted a desperate order from Rome. The Ninth, as a veteran force, might have been pulled from its damp British fortress and marched across the continent to plug a hole in the empire's defenses. This was not uncommon. Legions were moved, often with little fanfare in the historical record, especially if the transfer was part of a routine reinforcement or a response to a sudden invasion. They would have packed their standards, their eagle, and their records, and simply left York empty. In this scenario, the silence in Britain is not a mystery of death, but of relocation. The dated tile from York marks their last local project before receiving new orders. The Legion itself lived on, just somewhere else, yet this theory has its own troubling gap. If the Ninth was transferred, why does it also vanish from the records everywhere else? We have no clear evidence of it building a new fortress on the Rhine or fighting along the Danube under its famous name. This absence suggests the transfer theory might only be half the story. It is possible the Ninth was indeed sent to another brutal frontier war, and there it suffered devastating, perhaps catastrophic, losses. Not in a single ambush, but in a grinding, years-long campaign that bled the Legion dry. If its numbers fell too low, Roman military protocol was clear. The Legion would not be rebuilt. Instead, it would be formally dissolved, its remaining veterans folded into other units. Its cherished eagle standard would be ritually retired, perhaps sent back to Rome or ceremonially destroyed. Its name, Legio IX Hispana, would be stricken from the army lists. This process, the erasure of a military identity, could explain the profound silence. It wasn't a cover-up of a disaster, but a bureaucratic conclusion. The Legion ceased to exist as a legal entity, but what could prompt such a final, dishonorable end? One possibility lies in a Roman practice known as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. If a high-ranking commander of the Ninth was later found guilty of treason or brought great shame to Rome, the Senate might decree that all records of his achievements be erased. His name would be chiseled off monuments, his portraits defaced. If this commander's career was inextricably linked to the Ninth Legion, the unit's own history could have been scrubbed clean by association, a kind of guilt by bureaucratic proxy. The Legion's final fate, whether lost in battle or disbanded quietly, might have become a historical casualty in a political purge, so we are left with two very different visions. One is of a violent, dramatic end in the Highland mists. The other is of a slow, administrative death by pen and parchment in a distant capital. One feels like a legend, the other like a clerical error. Yet both could lead to the same empty space in our history books. To choose between them, we need something tangible, a piece of the puzzle that does not rely on scrolls that have turned to dust. We need an artifact, but what if the Ninth's final march was not north into the mist, but east toward the rising sun? The transfer theory finds its most compelling twist not on the rainy frontiers of Europe, but in the blistering deserts of the Middle East. During the very decades the Legion vanishes from Britain, the Roman Empire was engulfed in two colossal, bloody conflicts far to the east. The first was a prolonged war with the powerful Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival for control of the trade routes to Asia. The second was the cataclysmic Bar Kokhba revolt in the province of Judea, a desperate 3-year struggle by Jewish rebels that reportedly required the mobilization of over half the entire Roman army to crush. These were existential crises that drained legions from every corner of the empire. Could the hardened veterans of the Ninth have been yanked from York and thrust into this furnace? A fragment of ancient evidence suggests they might have been. A damaged list of military units, believed to date from around the year 125, places it Legio IX in Judea. This single, crumbling line is a lightning bolt for historians. If it refers to our Ninth Spanish Legion, then the entire mystery is upended. The story transforms from a disappearance in the Celtic fog to a potential demise under the harsh Judean sun. Imagine those British seasoned troops, accustomed to cool rains and green hills, now marching through arid canyons, besieging mountain fortresses, and facing a foe as fiercely determined as any Caledonian. The Bar Kokhba War was notorious for its brutality and Roman casualties. A legion could have been shattered there, its identity lost in the chaos of a war so traumatic that the Roman Emperor Hadrian later tried to erase the name of Judea itself from the map, renaming the province. In such a maelstrom, the bureaucratic trail of a single legion could easily have been severed, yet this tantalizing clue is hotly debated. Skeptics point out a critical problem. The list is incomplete and open to interpretation. That Legio IX could be a different Ninth Legion altogether, perhaps the Legiona Macedonica, which we know was active in the region. It could even be a simple clerical error, a scribe slip of the pen copied onto an official document. The absence of any other corroborating evidence from the East, no inscriptions, no monuments, make scholars cautious. But the possibility remains, shimmering like a mirage. It forces us to widen the map of the mystery from a single glen in Scotland to the entire breadth of the Roman world. The Ninth's eagle could have fallen in a Scottish ambush, or it could have been captured in a Judean cave fortress, hidden away as a rebel trophy. This theory doesn't solve the case. It fractures it into a dozen new possibilities, each leading down a different dusty road to oblivion. At the center of this mystery, both literally and spiritually, stood the Aquila. This was no ordinary flag. It was a masterwork of sacred metalwork, a sculpted eagle of silver or gold, its wings outstretched as if in flight, perched atop a towering pole often decorated with military honors and discs. More than a symbol, it was believed to be the very vessel for the legion's divine luck. Its numen, the eagle, represented Jupiter, king of the gods, and his favor was the ultimate source of the legion's strength and honor. Its protection was a matter of life, death, and eternal disgrace. Guarding it was the most sacred duty in the entire legion, entrusted to a single man, the aquilifer. This senior standard-bearer was not just a soldier carrying a pole. He was a living shrine, chosen for his immense courage and unwavering loyalty. He wore a distinctive lion skin headdress, a mark of his sacred office, and he protected the eagle with his life, often keeping it in a small shrine within his tent when the legion was at rest. In battle, he stood at the very heart of the formation. The eagle was the rallying point, the beacon every soldier fought toward. To see it advance gave them courage. To see it waver meant disaster was near. Now, picture the chaos of a collapsing battle line. The din of clashing swords and screams fills the air. The orderly ranks have broken into a desperate scrum. The aqualifer, surrounded by the enemy, fights with one hand on his weapon, the other gripping the heavy standard. He is a glaring target, for to capture the eagle is to capture the legion's soul. A spear finds its mark. The great standard trembles, then begins to fall. In that moment, time seems to stop for the Roman soldiers who witness it. The sight of their eagle toppling, of enemy hands seizing the sacred pole, was a psychological wound deeper than any physical blow. It meant Jupiter had turned his face away. The legion was spiritually annihilated in that instant. Even if the fighting continued, the aftermath of such a loss was codified in Roman military tradition. A legion that lost its eagle was often formally disbanded, its name stricken from the army rolls in perpetual shame. Survivors might be reassigned to other units in disgrace, but the legion, as a living entity with its own history and spirit, ceased to exist. This is why the fate of the Ninth Legion and the fate of its eagle are one and the same mystery. To find the eagle is to find the legion's final moment. Was it buried in a Scottish peat bog by triumphant Caledonians? Was it melted down into coins or jewelry in a Judean rebel hideout? Or was it richly retired in a quiet ceremony on some other frontier, its silver wings folded away for the last time by order of a distant emperor? The eagle is not just a clue in the story, it is the story, and its silence echoes just as loudly as the silence of 5,000 men. The silence left by the Ninth Legion did not last long. Within a few years, the entire strategic landscape of northern Britain was transformed by stone and earth. Emperor Hadrian arrived in the province in the year 122, and he ordered the construction of a monumental barrier, a wall spanning the entire width of the island from coast to coast. This was not a temporary fortification, but a permanent statement carved into the land itself. It declared a new Roman policy. Expansion was over, consolidation had begun. The frontier would now be a fixed, heavily defended line. This dramatic shift raises a compelling and provocative question. Was Hadrian's wall built, at least in part, as a direct strategic response to the loss of the Ninth Legion? Consider the timeline. The legion's last verified presence is around the year 108. By 122, the wall's construction is underway. That is a gap of roughly 15 years, a blink of an eye for imperial policy. The disappearance of a full legion, over 5,000 elite soldiers, would have been a seismic shock to Roman military planners. It would have exposed a terrifying vulnerability in the north, revealing that the local forces were not just capable of raids, but of potentially destroying the very instrument of Roman control. If the Ninth was wiped out in the Highlands, it proved the Caledonians could muster a force powerful enough to challenge a legion in open battle, or more likely, lure it into a fatal trap. The psychological impact on the remaining legions in Britain would have been profound. Confidence in their ability to control the territory north of York would have evaporated. In this light, Hadrian's Wall looks less like a routine border fortification and more like a crisis response. It was a strategic admission that the old way of forward aggression had failed catastrophically. The wall was a way to lock the door after the family silver, and perhaps an entire legion had already been stolen. It served as a massive force multiplier, allowing a smaller number of troops to monitor and control movement across a defined line, something that roaming patrols and isolated forts could no longer guarantee after such a devastating loss. So we can view the wall through two lenses. It is a brilliant feat of military engineering, a symbol of Roman power, but it is also potentially a monument to Roman fear and failure. Its very existence screams that something had gone terribly wrong in the lands beyond it. The thick stone curtain, with its forts, mile castles, and watchtowers, created a definitive end to the world. On one side, Roman order, roads, and towns. On the other, a wild, unconquered space that had just swallowed an army whole. In this interpretation, the wall is not just a defensive line, it is a gigantic tombstone. It marks the limit of Roman ambition, a boundary erected over the grave of the Ninth Legion's vanished ambitions. It physically embodied a new reality. Rome would go no further. The mystery of the Legion's fate, therefore, is literally set in stone across the British landscape, asking us to read between the lines of its formidable remains. History may be silent, but the land itself seems to remember. Across Britain, in the very hills where the Legion vanished, ancient stories whisper of lost armies and broken power. These are not Roman histories, but native legends, passed down through generations of Welsh bards and Scottish storytellers. They offer a different kind of evidence, not of dates and inscriptions, but of deep cultural memory. One of the most haunting comes from Wales. For centuries, a folktale spoke of a yellow legion of Rome that marched from the great fortress of Chester, clad in bright brass armor, heading north into the mountains of Caledonia. According to the story, they entered a high pass, were enveloped by a magical mist, and were never seen again. The tale is vague and mythic, but its core elements are striking. A Roman legion, identified by its distinctive armor, vanishing without a trace in the mountainous wilderness. It feels less like a chronicle and more like an echo, a trauma so profound it was woven into the local folklore, its details blurred by time but its central horror intact. Further north, in the Scottish tradition, another fragment persists. Old ballads and poems sometimes reference a catastrophic loss called the 900. This number is far smaller than a full legion's 5,000, but in the oral tradition, numbers are often symbolic or reduced to a memorable, heroic few. The 900 could represent a core group, perhaps the leading cohort or the most celebrated warriors, who met their end in some forgotten conflict with Rome. The persistence of this specific figure, coupled with the setting of the tales in the contested Highlands, suggests a folk memory of a massive military defeat. These stories are not proof, and no serious historian would treat them as a factual record. They are something else entirely, potential emotional fossils. A cataclysm like the loss of a legion would have sent shockwaves through the local tribes as well. A great victory, even a costly one, becomes the stuff of legend. The story of the invaders who were swallowed by the land would be told and retold around fires for centuries, slowly shedding its historical specifics and gaining mythic layers: the magical mist, the cursed pass, the silent mountains that keep their dead. This transformation from event to folklore is how societies process collective trauma. The hard facts of a battle dissolve, but the core experience, the awe, the fear, the staggering scale of the event crystallizes into story. The legend of the Yellow Legion and the Ballad of the 900 may be those crystals. They hint that something monumental did happen in those hills, something so significant it etched itself into the very identity of the people who witnessed it, or whose ancestors did. The stories become a kind of shadow archaeology. We cannot dig them up with a trowel, but we can listen to what they imply: that the disappearance of the Ninth was not a quiet administrative footnote, but a resonant, earth-shaking event that left a scar on the landscape of memory long after the last Roman soldier was gone. The legends whispered in the hills, but it was a modern novelist who gave the mystery its beating heart. In 1954, British author Rosemary Sutcliffe published The Eagle of the Ninth, a work of historical fiction that would fundamentally reshape how the world saw the vanished legion. Sutcliffe's story begins years after the Ninth's disappearance. Its hero is Marcus Flavius Aquila, the young son of the legion's commander, who is haunted by his father's lost honor. Wounded and discharged from the army, Marcus embarks on a perilous quest north of Hadrian's Wall. His mission is not to conquer, but to recover. He seeks the lost eagle standard, hoping its discovery will redeem his family's name and solve the riddle of the legion's fate. Accompanied by his British slave and friend, Esca, Marcus journeys into the territory of the Seal people, a fictionalized Caledonian tribe. The novel is a masterful blend of adventure and deep human themes. It explores the weight of legacy, the bonds of friendship across cultural divides, and the possibility of healing old wounds. Sutcliffe's genius was to frame the historical mystery not as a military puzzle, but as a personal journey of redemption. She gave us characters to care about, making the lost eagle a tangible object of desire and its recovery a path to peace. The book was an instant and enduring classic, captivating generations of readers. Its influence was magnified by adaptations, most notably a popular BBC television series and a major Hollywood film. These visual retellings brought the misty highlands, the gleaming Roman armor, and the solemn search for the eagle into living rooms and cinemas worldwide. The collective power of this story did something extraordinary. It took a fringe historical theory that the legion was destroyed in battle and cemented it as the dominant, emotionally resonant narrative in the public mind. For millions, the fate of the Ninth Legion was no longer a dry academic debate. It was the story of Marcus and Esca. The fictional quest for reconciliation between Roman and Britain felt so true, so satisfying, that it seamlessly merged with the scant historical fact. Sutcliffe's version became, for many, the unofficial history. This is the Rosemary Sutcliffe effect, where compelling fiction shapes our perception of the past, often more powerfully than textbooks ever could. It reminds us that we are drawn to stories that offer closure, where a son can find his father's eagle and lay a ghost to rest. But history, unlike fiction, rarely provides such neat and poignant endings. The real eagle, if it still exists, remains silent, untouched by any redemptive quest. Archaeology has armed us with tools the ancient Romans could never have imagined, yet the Ninth Legion continues to defy them. The search has shifted from dusty scrolls to the soil itself, a meticulous sifting for physical truth. The first and most logical place to look was its home, the fortress at Eboracum, modern-day York. Excavations here have been extensive, peeling back layers of the city to reveal the legion's stone foundations. Archaeologists hope to find signs of a violent, sudden end evidence of a fire, hasty repairs, or weapons damage that might indicate the fortress was overrun after a disaster in the north. Instead, they found something far more ambiguous: orderly abandonment. The barracks and headquarters show no clear signs of a catastrophic attack. The fortress seems to have been vacated in a planned manner, its buildings later reused by the Legion that replaced the Ninth. This doesn't prove a peaceful transfer, but it strongly suggests the Legion did not fall at its own doorstep. Its ending, whatever it was, happened somewhere else. That somewhere else has prompted a sweeping, decades-long survey of the Scottish Highlands. Teams have walked the glens and scanned the peat bogs with ground-penetrating radar, hoping to find the telltale scatter of a battlefield, a concentration of Roman hobnails, broken sword fragments, or the mass graves of thousands. While numerous small Roman camps have been identified, showing the army's reach, no single site screams legion-sized disaster. The closest candidate emerged at a place called Burnswark in southern Scotland, a hill fort site littered with Roman projectile weapons, suggesting a brutal siege. But the scale is wrong. It points to a regimented assault, not the chaotic aftermath of an ambush that destroyed an entire legion. Each surveyed valley that comes up empty is a silent verdict, pushing against the simple, dramatic battle narrative. The land, it seems, refuses to give up a clear crime scene. Then, a discovery far from Britain sent shockwaves through the theory. In the modern-day Netherlands, at a Roman fort along the Rhine frontier, archaeologists unearthed a simple, broken tile. Stamped into its surface were 3 letters, LEG, and then the numeral 9. It was a product of the Ninth Legion. This tiny, baked clay fragment is a bombshell. It suggests that at some point, elements of the Ninth were not in Britain at all, but were stationed or active on the continent. This fuels the transfer theory powerfully. Perhaps the Legion, or a large detachment of it, was indeed pulled from York and sent to reinforce the Rhine frontier. The tile could be a relic from that journey, lost or discarded as they passed through. Yet, like every clue in this mystery, it raises more questions than it answers. Does one tile prove the entire Legion was transferred? Could it have been shipped there as building material, or carried by a small contingent on a temporary assignment? It is a single data point in a vast emptiness, a whisper of movement where we expected only silence. So where does this leave us? Modern archaeology has provided pieces, but the puzzle remains stubbornly incomplete. Each discovery feels like turning on a flashlight in a dark room, only to illuminate a small corner while the rest of the space retreats further into shadow. The orderly fortress suggests a planned departure. The empty highlands lack a battlefield but cannot prove one didn't exist. The Dutch tile hints at a continental journey, but cannot tell us its purpose or its end. We are left with a collection of possibilities, each supported by a fragment of evidence and contradicted by an absence. The scientific process, which craves definitive answers, must instead make peace with a profound and enduring ambiguity. The ground has spoken, but in riddles. While the highlands kept their silence, a waterlogged ditch at a different northern fort began to whisper. At Vindolanda, a Roman garrison just south of what would become Hadrian's Wall, archaeologists made a discovery that would forever change our understanding of life on the frontier. They weren't digging up swords or skeletons, but something far more intimate: letters. These were the Vindolanda tablets, hundreds of thin, postcard-sized slices of wood, preserved for nearly 2,000 years in the oxygen-free wet clay of the site's foundation. The anaerobic soil stopped time, protecting not grand monuments, but the ephemeral notes of ordinary people. Here were shopping lists, duty rosters, party invitations, and personal pleas, all written in ink that remained startlingly legible. This was the text message inbox of the Roman army, a real-time feed from the edge of the empire. One famous note is a birthday party invitation from the fort commander's wife, Claudia Severa, to her friend Sulpicia Lepidina. She writes in her own hand, "I shall expect you, sister. Farewell, sister, my dearest soul." The humanity in that simple line collapses the centuries. These tablets pull back the curtain on the daily grind, the boredom, the camaraderie, and the underlying anxiety of life in a place where the civilized world felt terribly thin. So, did any of these hurried notes mention the missing ninth? Scholars have combed every fragment. There are references to other legions, to cavalry units, to the comings and goings of officials. But of the Legio IX Hispana, there is no direct word. Its name does not appear in the lists of units requiring supplies or in the gossipy updates between officers. This absence within such a vibrant archive is, in itself, a powerful piece of evidence. By the time these tablets were being written, roughly between the years 90 and 120, the ninth seems to have already vanished from the operational landscape of northern Britain. It was not just missing from history books, it was absent from the daily paperwork of its peers. The Vindolanda tablets do, however, paint the precise world into which the legion disappeared. They reveal a frontier humming with logistical tension. One tablet is an urgent request for more beer sent to a commanding officer. Another details the dispatch of wagons, the tracking of soldiers on leave, and the constant need for basic commodities like grain, leather, and nails. We read reports on the strength of local tribes, noting the Britons are poorly armed but numerous. Most chillingly, we get glimpses of the pervasive fear. A letter from an officer candidly describes the local enemy, calling them wretched little Britons, but also admitting their ability to move unseen and strike without warning. This is the palpable, day-to-day reality of the danger the Ninth would have faced. The tablets show us a military machine that was highly organized but stretched thin, operating in a land where intelligence was scarce and the environment itself was an adversary. They don't tell us the Legion's fate, but they brilliantly illuminate the stage upon which that final act was played. We see the logistical web that might have sent it north, the sparse intelligence that might have led it into a trap, and the constant, low-grade fear that could have exploded into full-blown catastrophe. The Vindolanda whispers give us not an answer, but the haunting context for the question. Yet a single stone, found far from the misty highlands, threatens to shatter the entire narrative of a British catastrophe. In the modern Dutch city of Nijmegen, built atop the ancient Roman fortress of Novaya Magus, archaeologists uncovered a tombstone. It was a standard Roman military marker, commemorating a man named Lucius Aemilius, a soldier of the 1st Cavalry Wing of the Spaniards. The inscription was routine, except for 5 crucial words at the very end. It stated that Lucius Aemilius had served his full term, 25 years, in 3 different legions. The first 2 were listed as Legio I Minervia and Legio Roman 20 Valeria Victrix. The third, the final unit of his long career, was recorded as Legio VII Hispana. The Roman numeral for 9, this was a veteran of the 9th Spanish Legion. The stone itself offered a date. It was dedicated by his heir in accordance with his will after his honorable discharge. Based on the style of the lettering and the historical context of the other legions mentioned, experts believe this tombstone was carved sometime after the year 121. That date is a seismic event in the timeline. Remember, the last solid evidence from Britain, the stamped tile at York, is from around 108. If the Nijmegen stone is authentic and correctly dated, it proves, beyond any doubt, that the 9th Legion was still an active, functioning military unit at least 13 years after it supposedly vanished in Britain. Soldiers did not serve in legions that had been wiped out. Lucius Aemilius must have been transferred into a living, breathing 9th Legion, and he served in it until his retirement, which likely occurred on the continent, not in Britain. This one artifact doesn't just challenge the annihilation theory, it pulls the entire mystery across the English Channel. It suggests the Legion was withdrawn from Britain intact and reassigned to the Rhine frontier, where it continued its service for years. The story shifts from a dramatic last stand to a bureaucratic redeployment. The silence in Britain is no longer a mystery of death, but of relocation. Yet, in archaeology, few things are ever that simple. The Nijmegen stone immediately became the most hotly contested artifact in the entire debate. Skeptics launched a meticulous assault on its validity. Could the inscription be a later addition, carved into an older, blank stone by someone with incomplete knowledge? Could the reading of the numeral be mistaken? Perhaps most compellingly, could this represent not the main legion, but a detached unit, a vexillation? The Roman army often broke legions apart, sending cohorts on temporary missions to other provinces. It is possible that a cohort of the 9th was sent to the Rhine, and this soldier served with that detachment. That cohort could have survived even if the main body of the legion met disaster elsewhere. This would make the stone a tragic red herring, evidence of a branch that lived while the tree itself was felled. The debate is fierce because the stakes are so high. For those who believe in the transfer theory, the Nijmegen stone is a smoking gun, a clear record that moves the mystery to a new theater. For those committed to the British disaster, it is an anomaly to be explained away, a footnote about a small group of men that doesn't reflect the fate of the whole. This single slab of rock, with its crisply carved letters, is a battleground. It holds two completely different histories in tension, proving that sometimes the most disruptive evidence isn't a missing piece, but one that simply doesn't fit the picture we've already painted in our minds. Rome was not a static monument, but a living, breathing organism constantly adapting to survive. To solve the mystery of a single legion, we must widen the lens beyond the fog of Britannia and view the entire empire in motion. During the very decades the 9th vanishes, the Roman military machine was undergoing one of its most significant periods of strain and reorganization. Emperors Trajan and Hadrian presided over an empire stretched to its limits. Trajan's ambitious conquest in Dacia and his massive Parthian campaign drained legions from quieter provinces like Britain to feed the war effort on the Eastern Front. Then Hadrian, his successor, faced the brutal reality of overextension. His famous policy shift from expansion to consolidation required a massive, empire-wide redeployment of forces. Legions were not permanent fixtures. They were assets to be moved, split, or merged as the crisis demanded. A unit could be ordered to march 1,000 miles at a moment's notice, its records following in a bureaucratic haze. This fluid, often chaotic, administrative reality offers a compellingly mundane explanation. Could the 9th Legion have simply been caught in this vast reshuffling? Imagine the orders arriving at Eboracum. The Legion is to prepare to march east. Its battle-hardened cohorts are invaluable for the coming campaign. They pack their eagle, their records, and their personal effect. They leave York under the command of another unit and begin the long trek across Europe. But in the tumult of a major war, what happens next? Reinforcements are fed into the front lines piecemeal. A cohort here is attached to another legion to plug a gap after a bloody siege. A detachment there is wiped out in a skirmish, and its survivors folded into a different unit. Over years of hard campaigning, the original legion's cohesion dissolves. Its identity frays under the relentless pressure of casualty replacement and ad hoc command. If the legion's numbers fell below a sustainable level through attrition, not a single catastrophe, the bureaucratic solution was clear: The remaining veterans would be transferred to bring other legions up to strength. The legion's number, the ninth, would be formally retired from the active army list to prevent administrative confusion. Its cherished eagle standard might be ceremonially retired in a storage vault in Rome, stripped of its sacred status. In this scenario, the disappearance is not a dramatic mystery, but a slow administrative fade. The legion did not vanish in a day. It was dissolved by 1,000 pen strokes over a decade. Its men did not all die together. They were simply reassigned, becoming anonymous soldiers in other legions, their original allegiance forgotten. The history of the Legio IX Hispana would not be erased by malice, but would simply stop being updated, its final chapters lost not to battle, but to filing. This theory turns the grand tragedy into a clerical obscurity. It suggests we are searching for a ghost that was never murdered, but was quietly pensioned off by an empire that had moved on. The silence in the records, then, is not a cover-up but a natural conclusion. When an institution is dissolved, its paperwork often ends. The haunting question becomes, which is more unsettling, a legion dying in glory or a legion disappearing into the fine print of imperial logistics, its proud history ending not with a scream, but with the soft closing of a ledger. A legion's annihilation is more than a military loss. It is a tear in the empire's psyche. If the ninth was truly wiped out in Britain, the shockwave would have rippled all the way to Rome, forcing a confrontation with its own myth of invincibility. We have a precedent for this national trauma in the Teutoburg Forest. That disaster, where 3 legions were slaughtered, left Emperor Augustus pounding his head against the palace walls, crying out for their return. It became a defining wound, a story told in hushed tones to remind every generation of the price of arrogance. A similar defeat in Britain would have carried the same raw power. Yet the historical record shows a stark difference. Teutoburg is documented, mourned, and studied. For the ninth, we have only silence. This discrepancy is the core of the psychological puzzle. Why would one cataclysm be remembered and the other seemingly erased? The answer may lie not in the event itself, but in the empire's changing face and its need for control. By the early 2nd century, Rome's propaganda machine was sophisticated. The emperor's image as the unwavering guarantor of peace and order was paramount. News of a legion being obliterated by tribes the Romans considered barbarians would have been a direct assault on that image. It could spark panic in the provinces, encourage further rebellion, and provide ammunition for the emperor's political enemies in the Senate. There was a powerful incentive to manage the truth, to spin the narrative or bury it entirely. This is where the Roman concept of infamia, of profound disgrace, becomes crucial. For a legion to lose its eagle was the ultimate infamia, a stain on its honor that was almost impossible to cleanse. If the ninth fell so completely that not even its eagle could be recovered, the disgrace was absolute. Acknowledging it publicly would mean admitting that Jupiter himself had abandoned Roman arms in a distant, fog-shrouded land. The state might have calculated that it was less damaging to let the legion simply fade from official memory than to formally announce a defeat that served no strategic purpose and only bred fear. Imagine the hushed conversations in the corridors of power. The governor of Britannia sends a grim, coded message. The ninth is gone, no survivors, no body to bury. In Rome, advisors weigh the options. Do they launch a costly, dangerous punitive expedition into the highlands with no guarantee of success, risking another humiliation, or do they seal the reports, quietly withdraw the frontier to a more defensible line, and tell a story of strategic consolidation? The rapid construction of Hadrian's Wall shortly after the legion's disappearance fits this second option perfectly. It is the action of an empire drawing a line under a disaster, literally and figuratively, choosing to build a monument to stability rather than commemorate a failure. The wall says, "We go no further," but it does not say why. That silence itself becomes the monument to the legion. The soldiers of the ninth, if they fell, may have been sacrificed twice, first on a Caledonian hillside, and then on the altar of imperial prestige, their memory suppressed to protect the idea that Rome never truly lost. But what if the enemy was not waiting in the hills, but was already inside the walls? The most dramatic theories focus on external threats, Yet the greatest danger to a legion could sometimes be its own men or the invisible killers they carried with them. Beyond battle and bureaucracy lie darker, more intimate possibilities for the Ninth's end. Consider first the unthinkable, rebellion. Roman legions were not immune to mutiny, especially when stationed for decades on a cold, distant frontier. Discontent could simmer over poor pay, harsh discipline, or a despised commander. If grievances boiled over, a legion could refuse orders, even turn its weapons on its officers. For the Ninth, a mutiny of such scale would be a state secret of the highest order. The empire could not admit that its own military machine had fractured. The official response would have been swift, brutal, and utterly silent. The mutineers might have been surrounded by loyal troops and executed to a man. Or in a more fantastical but enduring legend, perhaps the rebellious legionaries did not stand and fight Rome, but instead chose to disappear. They could have broken their oaths, discarded their armor, and melted into the local population, marrying into tribes and leaving their Roman identities behind. This idea of a legion going rogue, becoming a lost tribe itself, is the stuff of romantic fiction, but it speaks to a deep human truth. After years in Britannia, a soldier might have felt more connection to the land and its people than to a distant emperor. Desertion, on an individual scale, was a constant problem for the Roman army. A trickle of men slipping away into the night, lured by the promise of freedom or simply broken by the relentless grind, could over years bleed a legion dry. The Ninth might not have been destroyed in a day, but slowly eroded, its strength sapped until it was no longer a viable fighting force and was quietly disbanded. Then there is a foe no sword could block: disease. A Roman fortress barracks was a perfect incubator for epidemic. Men lived in close quarters, sanitation was basic, and new pathogens could arrive with every supply ship or trading caravan. An outbreak of something like smallpox, dysentery, or a virulent strain of malaria could have ravaged the Ninth at York. In a matter of weeks, a thriving community of 5,000 could be reduced to a ghost town filled with the dying and the dead. The social and military structure would collapse. There would be no one fit to guard the walls, tend the sick, or bury the bodies. A plague would not discriminate. It would cut down the young recruit, the veteran centurion, and the acolyte guarding the eagle with equal, silent efficiency. The eagle itself would stand untouched in a deserted shrine, surrounded by silence. From the outside, the result would look identical to a military catastrophe. The fortress would fall quiet. Patrols would cease to neighboring forts. It would appear the Ninth had simply vanished. A governor, fearing panic and the spread of the sickness, might quarantine the area and report only that the legion was lost. In this scenario, the legion's honor remains technically intact. They did not fall to a barbarian, but its end is no less tragic. It is a reminder that the empire's greatest legions, for all their discipline and engineering, were always vulnerable to the microscopic realities of the ancient world. These theories of internal decay, of rebellion or plague, lack the heroic arc of a last stand. They are stories of slow unraveling or sudden, invisible collapse. Yet in their grim plausibility, they complete the picture of a legion at the ragged edge of the known world, facing threats from every direction, including from within its own ranks and its own frail bodies. Rosemary Sutcliffe's novel was a landmark, but it was only the beginning of a cultural invasion. The Lost Legion proved irresistible to storytellers, its blank canvas inviting countless interpretations. Author Simon Scarrow wove the Ninth into his best-selling Eagles of the Empire series, with the novel The Eagle's Conquest placing the Legion at the heart of the Claudian invasion of Britain decades before its disappearance. Here, the Ninth is not a mystery, but a vibrant, active force, its legend building toward an unknown future fate. This approach is common, using the Legion's powerful name as a shorthand for Roman military might, letting its ominous historical end color the narrative with a sense of impending doom. The story audiences know best, however, likely comes from the silver screen. The 2011 film The Eagle, starring Channing Tatum and Jamie Bell, is a direct adaptation of Sutcliffe's quest narrative. It translates the personal journey of Marcus and Esca into a cinematic adventure, emphasizing physical struggle and the stark beauty of the Highland landscape. The film's climax offers a definitive visual answer to the mystery, showing the eagle hidden in a sacred tribal totem. This choice provides the closure audiences crave in a 2-hour drama, but it permanently fixes one speculative image over the historical void. It teaches viewers that the eagle was recovered and the Legion's honor restored, a satisfying fiction that can overshadow the far less certain historical record. This trend continues in interactive media. The strategy game Total War, Roman II allows players to command the Legio IX Hispana on the digital battlefield, offering a what-if scenario where its fate rests in the player's hand. Here, the Legion is a set of statistics and a unique unit card, its disappearance not a tragedy but a gameplay possibility. Meanwhile, documentaries on historical channels revisit the evidence, interviewing archaeologists and walking the ruins of York and the Highland. They present the competing theories, but by their very nature, they often frame the mystery as a puzzle to be solved, subtly pushing the audience to pick a side: annihilation or transfer. Each of these adaptations, from page to screen to controller, performs a subtle alchemy. They take the sparse, frustrating ambiguity of the historical evidence and transform it into a coherent story with characters, motives, and most importantly, an ending. The messy bureaucratic possibility of a transfer lacks cinematic punch. The slow death by plague or desertion offers no heroic climax, so culture naturally gravitates toward the grandest, most emotionally resonant version, the heroic last stand or the redemptive quest. In doing so, these stories do more than entertain. They become the new vessels of memory for a modern audience. For many Channing Tatum's Marcus is now the face of the mystery, and the film's depiction of the eagle's hiding place feels as real as any archaeological report. This is the powerful legacy of the Ninth in popular culture. It ensures the Legion is never truly forgotten, but it also addresses the ghost in costumes of our own design, making the historical truth forever harder to distinguish from the profoundly compelling myth. The true power of this story lies not in the Legion's fate, but in the land that claims it. In the rolling hills and quiet ruins of Britain, the lost Ninth has become more than a historical puzzle. It is a foundational myth for a nation. For England, this is the story of Rome's first tentative foothold on the island, a narrative of civilization being planted in wild soil. The Legion's fortress at York is a physical anchor to that classical past, a direct line to the empire that built roads, laws, and cities. Its disappearance represents the profound vulnerability of that project, a reminder that order on this island was always fragile, always contested by the untamed dark beyond the wall. The mystery asks a haunting question about English origins. How deep did Roman roots truly go before they were severed by something ancient and unknown? North of that wall, in Scotland, the story transforms into something entirely different. Here, the Ninth is not a lost pillar of civilization, but a vanished instrument of oppression. Its potential destruction is not a tragedy, but a triumph. It symbolizes a heroic, successful resistance by the Caledonian tribes against the world's greatest military machine. The mist that may have swallowed the Legion is not a shroud of mourning, but a protective cloak of the land itself, defending its people. In this version, the silence is a victory cry that echoes through the glens, a proof that the spirit of this place could not be conquered, not even by Rome. The lost eagle becomes a trophy taken, not a relic mourned. Over centuries, these competing interpretations have been adopted and wielded by different groups seeking to define themselves. Victorian Britain, at the height of its own empire, saw a reflection of its own colonial might in the Roman legions, viewing the Ninth's end as a cautionary tale about the perils of the unruly frontier. In modern times, the narrative has been reclaimed by those who see themselves as the underdogs, the resilient defenders of place against overwhelming power. The story is remarkably flexible, able to symbolize both imperial loss and native victory, a shared myth that means opposite things to different people. It serves as a potent vessel for themes of resistance, the high cost of ambition, and the eerie power of an ancient landscape to keep its secrets. Ultimately, the mystery of the Ninth Legion belongs less to Rome and more to the British earth itself. It is a story written not on parchment, but in the stones of Hadrian's Wall, in the empty foundation lines at York, and in the whispered winds over the Scottish moors. The land holds the only memory that has not faded. Every walker on the Pennine Way, every visitor to the forts along the wall, is walking through the setting of this unresolved drama. The unanswered question gives the landscape a charge, a sense that history here is not a closed book, but a living, breathing presence. We look at a mist-filled valley and wonder not just about geology, but about ghosts. That is the enduring legacy of the Lost Eagle. It turned geography into story and made every quiet corner of Britain a potential site for one of history's greatest vanishing acts. The search has left the library and entered the laboratory. In the 21st century, the cold case of the Ninth Legion is being reopened not with shovels, but with scanners and algorithms, applying a forensic mindset to an ancient landscape. One of the most powerful new tools is LIDAR, or light detection and ranging. Mounted on aircraft, this technology fires millions of laser pulses at the ground, digitally stripping away forests and undergrowth to reveal the subtle contours of the earth below. Across the Scottish lowlands and highlands, LIDAR surveys are acting like an X-ray for history. They can expose the ghostly outlines of marching camps, temporary overnight fortifications dug by a legion on the move that are invisible to the naked eye. A faint, rectangular depression in a farmer's field, or a series of straight lines crossing a moor, can now be spotted from the air and mapped with precision. Each new camp traced adds a potential dot to the Legion's last known route, a digital breadcrumb trail that might one day lead to the site of a final, fatal engagement. Beyond mapping, science is learning to read the very soil for stories of violence. When a massive battle occurs, the ground itself is altered. The decomposition of thousands of bodies, the leaching of metals from blood and broken weapons, and the disturbance of the earth can leave a unique chemical signature. Archaeologists now use soil chemistry analysis, taking core samples and testing for spikes in elements like phosphate, which is abundant in bone and decaying organic matter, or certain metals associated with ancient warfare. Imagine a team taking samples from a remote Scottish glen. If the tests reveal an anomalous, concentrated chemical footprint in a shape and size consistent with a large battle, it could be the silent, scientific echo of a catastrophe, a stain on the land that has lasted 2 millennia. This method cannot name the combatants, but it can point to a location where something profoundly violent and large-scale occurred, demanding a closer look with traditional excavation. Meanwhile, historians are conducting a different kind of digital excavation. They are building vast databases that compile every shred of evidence about the Roman military, every tombstone, every inscription, every papyrus pay record from across the empire. The goal is to cross-reference this mountain of data in ways never before possible. A soldier's name found in Britain can be checked against a discharge record in Egypt. The movement of a particular commander can be tracked through postings from the Rhine to Judea. This network analysis can reveal patterns and connections hidden in fragmented records. Perhaps it will show a cluster of veterans from the Ninth appearing in another legion's roles on the Danube at a specific date, proving a transfer, or maybe it will confirm a complete absence of any such data after 120, strengthening the case for annihilation. This is detective work on an imperial scale, treating the entire Roman world as a single crime scene and every artifact as a potential clue. We are in a new chapter of this investigation, one defined by patience and pixels more than grand expeditions. The answer may not arrive as a single, dramatic find like a silver eagle held alight from the mud. It might instead emerge slowly as a pattern of LIDAR dots connecting into a line of march, a soil sample returning a shocking result, or a database query yielding a perfect, forgotten map. The mystery of the Ninth Legion is no longer just a subject for historians and novelists. It is a puzzle for data scientists and geophysicists. This fusion of old questions and new tools means that the story, silent for so long, might yet have one final, definitive revelation waiting to be decoded. Perhaps the most compelling truth about the Lost Ninth is that it remains lost. We are drawn to its story not in spite of the unanswered questions, but because of them. This is a perfect historical enigma, a clean, sharp question, What happened to 5,000 men and their sacred eagle that refuses a clean, sharp answer? That void is a powerful space. It invites us in. Unlike a settled historical fact, which we can only observe, a mystery like this asks us to participate. We become detectives alongside the archaeologists, weighing the Nijmegen tombstone against the silent highlands, judging the logic of a transfer against the drama of a last stand. The story blends genres seamlessly. It is military history and high adventure. It is human tragedy and a ghost story whispered by the landscape itself. There is even a touch of the supernatural in those old Welsh tales of a legion swallowed by a magical mist. This combination is irresistible. It means the mystery has something for everyone, from the scholar analyzing soil samples to the reader lost in a novel's pages. But the deepest allure is more personal. The blank canvas of the past allows us to project our own stories, our own fears, and our own hopes onto it. Are we drawn to the tragic heroism of a final battle that might reflect our own respect for sacrifice and doomed courage? Does a bureaucratic fade-away theory feel more plausible? That could speak to a modern understanding of how large institutions often fail, not with a bang, but with paperwork. The quest for the eagle, so central to the fiction, taps into a universal longing for redemption, for recovering something precious that was stolen by time. The mystery serves as a mirror. What we see in it often says as much about us as it does about ancient Rome, and that is why any single, proven solution, however satisfying, would also be a kind of ending. The case would be closed, the conversation would stop. The enduring power of the Ninth Legion lies in the conversation itself, in the endless debate that keeps the past alive and dynamic. It forces us to keep looking, to keep questioning our assumptions about empire, frontier, and the fragile line between legend and history. The unknown, in this case, is not a failure of research. It is an invitation to perpetual exploration, a reminder that some stories are so powerful they are meant to remain unfinished, echoing forever just beyond the reach of the final word. So where does the evidence finally point? Let's place the three dominant theories side by side on the scales of history. First, the annihilation in Britain. Its greatest strength is its visceral, dramatic power, the story we instinctively feel. It explains the sudden silence and the construction of Hadrian's Wall as a direct defensive reaction. The pro column holds the cultural legends and the sheer logic that a legion stationed to fight northern tribes could have met its end there, but the con column is heavy. Archaeology has provided no battlefield, no mass grave. The Nijmegen tombstone, if genuine, is a devastating counterpoint, proving the legion was alive and active on the continent years after it supposedly vanished in the mist. Without that battlefield, the theory remains an emotionally compelling ghost story, but a ghost story nonetheless. Next, the theory of transfer and dissolution. This is the bureaucrat's answer, and its strengths are rooted in the mundane reality of empire. Legions were moved constantly. The Nijmegen stone and the Dutch tile are physical evidence pointing to a continental presence. It neatly explains why the legion disappears from British records it simply left. The orderly abandonment of the York fortress fits this perfectly. The con, however, is that it feels deeply unsatisfying. It lacks an ending. If the Ninth was transferred, where did it ultimately go? Why does it also vanish from all other records? This theory often feels like it only moves the mystery to a new location, trading Scottish fog for the dust of some forgotten frontier archive. It solves the British silence, but creates a continental one. Then we have the hybrid scenarios, the messy middle ground where the most probable truth often lies. Perhaps the Ninth was indeed transferred from Britain, not in glory, but out of necessity. Sent to the brutal wars in Judea or to the Danube frontier, it was then bled white in a grinding campaign. Its numbers fell so low through attrition that it was no longer a viable independent unit. Roman military protocol would then dictate its formal disbandment. The remaining veterans were absorbed into other legions, and its sacred eagle was ritually retired. This combines the transfer theory with a final, administrative death. It accounts for the Nijmegen evidence the legion lived on for a time, while also explaining its ultimate, complete disappearance from history. The disgrace was not from a lost eagle on a battlefield, but from being dissolved due to ineffectiveness, a fate almost as shameful for a proud legion. When we weigh it all, the scale tips away from a single, cinematic catastrophe in Britain. The Nijmegen evidence is simply too significant to ignore. It strongly suggests the legion survived past the year 120. This makes a total wipeout in Scotland before that date highly unlikely. The most probable scenario is indeed a combination, a transfer from Britain, followed by heavy losses in another conflict, culminating in a quiet, bureaucratic disbandment. Its men faded into other units, its eagle was stored away, and its name was gently erased from the active rolls. Yet we must stress this with absolute clarity. This is only the most probable scenario based on the fragments we have. It is not proven fact. Absolute certainty remains as elusive today as it was a century ago. The Nijmegen stone could be an outlier. That battlefield in the Highlands could still lie beneath a peat bog, waiting. The true fate of the Ninth Legion and its eagle persists in the realm of compelling probability, a history written in whispers and shadows, forever daring us to believe we have finally solved it. That vanished eagle cast a long and permanent shadow. Whether the Ninth Legion fell in battle or faded from the rolls, its disappearance was not just a military incident, it was a profound signal. It marked the moment Rome's boundless ambition, its drive to push the map ever outward, finally hit a wall. This is not a wall of stone like Hadrian's, but a far more formidable barrier woven from geography, climate, and the unbreakable will of the people who call that land home. Think of the empire as a great source of light, its laws and legions radiating out from the Mediterranean core. For a century, that light had pushed into the misty north of Britain, illuminating new roads and fortresses. But in those highlands, the light began to dim. The terrain itself became an enemy, all dense forests, treacherous bogs, and sudden, blinding fogs that neutralized Rome's greatest strengths, its organized formations and its clear lines of sight. The local tribes understood this landscape intimately, using it as a weapon. They were not a conventional army to be met on an open field, but a force that could dissolve into the hills, striking from the shadows before vanishing again. The Ninth Legion, for all its discipline and engineering, was ultimately an instrument of a system that could not fully function there. Its fate, whatever it was, proved that some frontiers could not be erased, only acknowledged. The lost eagle, therefore, becomes a powerful metaphor. It was the ultimate symbol of Roman authority and divine favor, the very embodiment of their claim to dominate. Its disappearance, whether captured or ceremonially retired, signals that this authority had a limit. It represents Rome's own vulnerability at its farthest edge, a crack in the invincible facade. Every empire tells itself a story of eternal strength, but the real story is often written at its margins, in the places where control becomes thin and stories turn into whispers. The Ninth Legion story is that marginal note, written not in ink but in silence. It reminds us that the greatest powers do not simply decline from within. They often encounter something external they cannot absorb, something that simply says, no further. The eagle was lost where Rome's light faded, and in that loss, we see the true shape of the empire, not as an endless monolith, but as a brilliant flame that could only push back the dark so far before the dark pushed back. So the Legion marches on, not in stone or scroll, but in our endless fascination. We have followed its trail from the stamped tiles of York to the whispering tablets of Vindolanda, weighed the solid proof of the Nijmegen tombstone against the echoing silence of the Highlands, and traced the shadow it cast upon the Great Wall of Hadrian. This epic journey through evidence and speculation leads us to a single, powerful truth. The fate of the Ninth Legion and its sacred eagle remains one of history's greatest unsolved cold cases. And perhaps that is exactly why it endures. A neat answer would close the book. This haunting ambiguity, however, throws the book wide open. It transforms you from a passive listener into an active participant. With every piece of evidence presented, you have been weighing probabilities, judging arguments, and forming your own conclusions. You have become the detective. This mystery belongs as much to you now as it does to the archaeologists and historians. So, what do you believe happened on that final march? Did the eagle fall in a Caledonian ambush? its silver wings disappearing into the peat? Was it carried across continents, only to be retired in a dusty storeroom when the legion's name was quietly erased? Or does the truth lie in some other, yet unimagined corner of the vast Roman world? The conversation does not end here. Share your verdict, your own theory, in the comments below. Tell us where you think the trail goes cold, and if this journey into the past has ignited your curiosity, the investigation can continue. Seek out the books, visit the forts, walk the line of Hadrian's Wall, and feel the history for yourself. For more deep dives into the ancient world's greatest enigmas, subscribe and join us as we unravel the next mystery. Until then, picture that eagle, not as a relic in a museum case, but as it was, a flash of silver against a leaden sky, a symbol of absolute power. And then picture it gone, somewhere in the earth or in the stories. It is still waiting to be found.